Hello, my name is Eric Hatlestad with New Image Brewing. I manage all of our sales and distribution, and also have Brandon Capps, who is our founder and head brewer. On to the next beer, one of my favorite beers that we brewed this year, Survivables IPA. So why name it Survivables? Where does that come from?
One of the things that I do a lot is just read different, studies that are being published, usually by, a variety of different places. Some are coming from brewers, some are coming from labs. This one in particular was coming from Yakima Chief Hops, and their lab division was doing a series of experiments to test which hop varietals would work best in terms of how much of their flavor active compounds were retained from the hot side through to the end of fermentation. So what they were looking for in that particular study was what hop varietals have flavor compounds that survive the most from the start to finish of that process, particularly looking at the hot side. So that's where the name part came from, is they called that, the data they reported from that study was called Survivables, and they're working on a cryo blend that they're going to launch, I believe, sometime in 2021, called Survivables, for that reason. So that's where the name came from. And then I was looking at a couple other studies at the time that were more about cold side hop methodology. And while I was playing around with kind of experimenting with some hop side efficiency stuff, I wanted to also simultaneously play around with some of these other cold side techniques. And so we were really playing mostly with dry hop temperature and contact time. And it's really interesting, just a lot of studies indicating that a lower temperature and shorter contact time kind of lead to better results. And so we just played around with some of those parameters on this beer as well. And it was cool because this wasn't a beer where we went like through the roof on raw materials, but the beer that resulted from it was just awesome. And one of my favorites of the year too.
How does a dry hop take place? Can you explain that process of the brew that you do?
Totally. Early on in brewing, most of what people were using hops for was their aseptic properties. So they were trying to get acid extraction and bitterness and things of that nature. So it was just all about throwing hops in the kettle. And then eventually people decided to start playing with, well, we get all this like great flavor and bitterness and, these flowery, citrusy flavors from adding these hops in the kettle. Why don't we try adding some of this to the fermenter and let them kind of macerate in the alcohol solution and see if we get a different character from that. And that method is dry hopping. For us, what it means is just adding hops after fermentation has started, and usually once fermentation has been completed is where the majority of dry hopping takes place. But the purpose being that this is the end of when the majority of the processes that might otherwise volatilize the hop, and so you carry over more of this raw, fresh hop character.
So this next question I find kind of interesting because we heard it a lot here in 2015, 16, 17, and that's, how do you make a beer hazy?
Yeah, I mean, the simple physical answer is that there are compounds in suspension that are reflecting light back, and that it's not passing through. So that's the physics answer. Mm-hmm. And so then the question that kind of comes from that is, what are the compounds that are in suspension, which is a big part of what people were debating. And it's funny
flour?
Because yeah, well, I think where a lot of people got maybe off base a little bit is that the beers that had been hazy up to that point were like Belgian wit beer and different types of sour and Belgian style kind of beers where yeast was in suspension, or you like roused the bottle and poured it back in. So, with those beers, it was protein, carbohydrate, and yeast that were giving a beer most of its haze. With hazy IPAs, over the last 5 or 6 years, a lot more studies have been done into what that haziness is coming from, and a big part of it is just hop compounds. And it's been interesting to see we've actually taken like a crystal clear lager and then added hop terpenes in the bright tank. And that like 100 milliliters of terpenes in 1,000 gallons was enough to like give a noticeable turbidity.
What about the malt bill? Does that have any influence? Say if we use more oats in that side of it, does that affect the haziness?
Yeah, it does. Using oats and wheat is definitely very popular for hazy IPAs. It certainly does contribute, anywhere from some to a good amount of